So I'm Caitlin Kelly. I do energy healing work and styling styling that's healing based and healing work that's movement based. I'm also studying herbal medicine right now, and I do life coaching. I realized that a lot of what I had really loved about my work were times when I could just sit with a person or sit with a community and say, what do you need? And figure out how I could help. And so that's kind of what led me into coaching, because this process of like helping people kind of envision the life that they want for themselves and then putting together a strategy for how to make that happen is something that I find incredibly exciting and satisfying. So now I'm in the process of healing my adrenal fatigue and really actively kind of rebuilding the paradigm of my life, especially my professional life, so that it's more sustainable. And so I'm kind of still in the thick of it. I'm kind of still in the middle of it. And so I'm going to really help, share some things with you guys that have been helpful to me. So everything I'll talk about this evening, are strategies that either worked for me in my previous life, running a small business / nonprofit organization, things that I learned from other coaches that I've worked with, or things that have helped me on my healing path. And my goal tonight is to kind of help you guys find some balance, whatever that means, and we'll talk about that because it's a little bit of an odd term, to avoid burnout, to avoid running yourself too ragged, especially when it's in the name of something that you love, because when you're if you're a farmer or you're an entrepreneur, you actively choose that life, right? That's not, at least a lot of people who are involved in farming in the Atlanta area are, some of them are generational farmers, but a lot of them are not, right? And so it's like, this is not a community of people who are just like, do whatever your parents said, like, oh, I guess I'll just become an investment banker, oh, I guess I'll just become a corporate lawyer, and you aren't that invested in your work. You guys can tell me, but I'm guessing that you probably really love what you're working on. And I've been there. All right, so I'm gonna start first by addressing the problem. And so you guys have to excuse me because I am in my herbal medicine program has a little bit of a traditional Chinese medicine component to it. So this is like really on my brain a lot these days. And I'm thinking a lot about like Chinese healing traditions. So I've been thinking a lot about like the yin and the yang of our lives. Right, so we know that like the yin side of life, of anything, is the quiet side, the cool side, the feminine side, the side of resting, the side of consolidating energy, and the yang side is the side of action, of dispersing energy, of going all the time. It's associated with masculine energy, and we live in a society, especially in the United States, that really values yang and really does not value yin. And you can kind of take that into all kinds of like political, conversations, but there's this sort of this Puritan work ethic thing that we have in our culture where we think you need to be working all the time, and that's what we reward. We reward people who don't take their vacations, who don't take days off. That's how we define success. And it's really making people sick. Like most of the chronic health or the health problems that medical practitioners see are all stress related, are all related to the fact that people do not have the balance of the yin. And this is the symbol that everybody knows, right? But it means something. Like you need both of these energies in order to be a complete person. And so this slide has a nice little sort of like breakdown of the energies of these two things, and they're interdependent, right? But when we like don't have any of the stuff on this side, and we only have the things on this side, things get really out of balance. And you guys feel that, you feel that in your lives, and the fact that you don't feel like you have time for yourself. You feel it in your body a lot. I'll talk a lot about like health related issues with this. This is just like how our society is set up. And the problem with this is that it can actually create, one of the many problems is that it can actually create health problems. So there is this phenomenon called general adaptation syndrome, which is, have you guys heard of this before? So it's basically the idea that our body adapts to stress. So stress in like a medical sense, not just meaning like, oh, I'm in traffic a lot, or like, oh, I'm got in a fight with my mom, like that kind of stress, but anything where you have to like push yourself. So exercise is a great example of that. You stress your muscles and you stress your lungs, your cardiovascular system in order to grow, in order to push yourself, in order to get stronger. So there are these phases in stressing the body where, let me go to this slide, where your body is kind of like, oh no, ah, what's happening? Oh my God, I'm stressed out. And then it starts to grow. So this is like where you're like pushing, you're learning a new language. Like you're kind of like, all these words, they don't mean anything, but then your brain starts to build new neural pathways, right? You're building a new habit. You're going outside of your comfort zone and you start to like learn how to do new things. You're pushing muscles and they start to get stronger. But if the stress stage, the resistance stage, continues without rest afterwards, that's where you injure yourself. So in terms of so thinking about it in terms of a muscle, I think is probably the easiest way to visualize it, because we all know what that feels like. Marathon runners, like you run too much, you hurt your knees, But I think in terms of our work lives, we often don't really think about it in these terms. We're just like, oh, well, I'll just drink another cup of coffee. Oh, well, I'll just like get through these next few days. And you don't realize that like there's a lot of stuff happening in your body in this stage when you don't go from the sympathetic back to the parasympathetic state. And when I talk about that, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? We got some yogis in the room. Yeah, okay. So Patricia Howell is my teacher. And she said this thing in class one time that like really stuck with me, because it was like, yeah, like our society is set up for yang activities only. And yin activities are not appreciated. It's considered, that you're like being lazy, or, you need to like have every single second in your calendar filled. And so, there's this idea of like creating your life on purpose. And how do you create the space for yourself to recover, to go back into that parasympathetic state. Let me come back with my notes. A lot of this stuff I kind of know off the top of my head, but I want to make sure I'm like checking back in with my notes. Okay, so I'm going to use a lot of concepts from like health and the earth rhythms to talk about like creating rhythms in our own lives that can support feeling balanced. And basically, I'm going to talk a lot about like ways to bring yin into your yang. So like I think sometimes the notion of work-life cohesion is a little bit more of a helpful concept than work-life balance, especially for people like small business entrepreneurs and farmers, because there's not necessarily, you don't have a 9-to-5 job. That's not how that works, So you can't just like be like, oh, well, all right, we're done. It's like, the work still continues. There's always more to be done. So I'm going to talk a lot about creating resting periods between your periods of action, so you can kind of like keep going longer. And I think that the notion of dynamic equilibrium is one that I like to think about a lot too, because in terms of like health, we tend to think like, okay, I've had a stressful period and then my body comes back into homeostasis, which is the sort of where your body is when it's not under stress. But even in this notion of homeostasis, nothing is static. Everything is constantly like moving, right? And if you take that sort of metaphor of the body out to your body of affairs, out to the rest of your life, that's still happening, right? So what I'm not going to talk about today is like how to have like a strict schedule that's like, okay, I work and then I rest, and then I work and then I rest, because things are constantly changing. There's always going to be something. There's going to be a thunderstorm, and your kid's going to get sick, and you're going to get sick, and who knows what's going to happen, right? So it's really important to think about just creating a dynamic equilibrium where there's like room in your life for the calm time and room in your life for the active time. And I'm going to talk a lot about kind of living with cycles as a way to get into those habits and those rhythms so that it becomes a little bit more effortless. Okay, so and I'm going to talk about like going from a macro level to a micro level. And there are like a lot of different ways to live with cycles. There's the cycle of the seasons, cycles of the moon, our own circadian rhythms in our body, and the rhythms of sort of sympathetic, parasympathetic. And so I'm going to talk about bringing these cycles, into your life on a day-to-day basis and into your work life. Okay, so kind of, as I said, I have a little bit of a bias right now for Chinese medicine. Do you guys, are you guys familiar with like the 5 elements in Chinese medicine? It's okay if you're not, I'll talk about them. But basically there are water, wood, fire, earth, and metal, and they're each associated with a body system and with a season. So I actually found, I don't know why I used both of these slides, but I don't know, I was just like picking images off the internet that I liked. And so this one, I like this one because it's a little more like dynamic. We've got these like psychedelic images of the, of the elements. And so I suspect that a lot of you guys, as farmers and food people, are already living in cycle with the seasons in a lot of ways. That's something that's already kind of built into your life. You have a connection to the earth that's already there. But one of the things that's so fascinating to me about Chinese medicine is that in Chinese medicine, each of the elements is associated, like I said, with a season, but also with a body system. And so if you use this as a kind of a map or a guideline for thinking about cycles of your life, you can see that living in cycle with the seasons can also help support your own physical body, not just psychological well-being or the health of the earth. All right, so I'm gonna take a second to kind of explain these a little bit. So I think it makes sense to start with water. So water is the most yin element. It's the element that's associated with consolidating energy. It's the element where this holds your energy reserves for the whole rest of your body, for the whole rest of the year in terms of cycles of the seasons, and it's associated with winter. So water also has a lot to do with sort of rhythms of human health, like rhythms of maturation when people hit puberty and when they, start to age. And so, okay, I'm gonna try to do this quickly. So this is also for anyone who knows about this, you'll have to excuse me because this is like the quickest, dirtiest explanation of a very complex system, but it's also pretty simple, like it's both things. So anyway, water then feeds wood. Wood is associated with spring, and the wood element, as you can see here, it's connected to the liver and the gallbladder. And the wood element is like the entrepreneur element. It's the element of making things happen. So if you think about a tree, right, it sort of draws nutrients from the ground and brings it out into the world, and sort of it acts as this channel for bringing energy into the world. And wood also has a real tendency, wood is like, it gets really excited about new projects, and it has a tendency to overwork. And a lot of wood imbalance symptoms have to do with overwork. Patricia Howell, my herbal teacher, talks about how most of the people who she sees in her practice have wood imbalance issues because it's just stress, it's just overwork. So wood then feeds fire. Fire is the most yang element, and it's associated with summer, with the heart and with the small intestine. It also controls passion and inspiration and vision, your vision for what you want to create in your life. So there's a big pattern, there's a big sort of connection between these two especially. And then earth is associated with late summer, early fall. So it's sort of like that Indian summer period. And I like that, we're having this conversation in Atlanta because I think that in Southern Appalachia, we can feel that seasonal change a lot where, there's this time in early October when it's not summer anymore, but it's not really fall yet either. And it's a very fecund time, right? There are a lot of plants that grow at this time. And so the earth element is associated with the stomach and the spleen. Stomach, not surprisingly, it has a lot to do with digestion. And the earth element sort of helps make sure that the nutrients that you get from food, but also sort of from everything you absorb, new information that you learn, gets assimilated and kind of sent to where it needs to go. And then the metal element is associated with fall, with lungs and the large intestine. And the metal element has a lot to do with discipline and judgment and the ability to discern the self from the other. So it also controls the surface immune system, whereas water controls the deep immune system, like the bone marrow. So all of that is sort of to create this visual for you guys, and we'll talk a little bit more about these times of day, where if you can find a way in your life to rest a bit more in the winter, you will have more energy reserves for the whole rest of the year. And in particular, you'll see because the water element is associated with kidneys and bladder, it's also associated with the adrenal glands. So one of the best ways that you can keep from burning out, keep from being overly stressed, bring more sympathetic time into your life, is to take it slowly in the winter. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that, like kind of in your individual work life, because it's not always easy. But you can sort of, by doing that, you can help heal your adrenal glands, which work so hard every single day. Does this make sense to you guys so far? Are we cool? Okay. Okay, so then I want to take this down to the next sort of smaller level and talk about the circadian rhythms of your own body. And this might seem really basic, but I think, a lot of times, especially when we're living in this very young culture, especially if you're a person who's very driven, especially if you have a lot of responsibilities, it's easy to get disconnected from the rhythms of your own body. But if you can live in rhythm with your own body, you will be supporting your body in what it wants to do instead of making your body push beyond what it wants to do. And that is a way that you can sort of, again, have more parasympathetic time in your life and just create a feeling of ease and balance in general. So your adrenal glands are not going to have to kick in quite as much if you're doing things at the time when it makes sense for your own body. You guys follow that? Does that make sense? So then I put this little note here, right? So it's outside the purview of this conversation to talk about nutrition and sleep. But I think it's really, really important to remember that sleeping when you're tired and eating when you're hungry and drinking when you're thirsty are really important ways of taking care of yourself and can really help you avoid burnout. And that just deciding I just have to do this, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that in a minute. You can really accomplish quite a lot with somewhat basic health things, eating food that doesn't irritate your digestive system, and when you get thirsty or you get tired or you get hungry, that makes your adrenal glands kick in too. So you're just going to be in constant fight or flight mode and never being able to get back to that parasympathetic time, even if you love your work. Okay, so here's where I kind of think about bringing these concepts into our day-to-day work lives. So I think that those same kind of circadian rhythms appear in your work. So you will find, I suspect, that there are certain times of day, and maybe even times of the month or times of the year, when you like to do certain types of work, when you're most productive doing certain types of work. I find, for example, that I like to move around a lot, and so if I've used my body a lot in the morning, then it's a lot easier for me to do administrative stuff in the afternoon or stuff that I don't like as much. Or that if I get kind of tired in the afternoons, it energizes me to work with other people. So that's a great time of day to have a meeting with someone else because I get a little bit of energy from it. And I think a lot of times in our work lives, certainly coming from the nonprofit background, there are cycles to your work. There are times when you have those deadlines, times when you're kind of fundraising more than other times, times when there's more food that's coming out of the ground than other times, things like that. Yeah, do you guys have any questions about this? I'm gonna go on and talk about it a little more. Okay. Let me with my notes, make sure I'm saying everything that I plan to say. Yeah, okay. So to bring it back to the Chinese 5-phase thing, again, locating stress management in the body. the chi, so you guys saw that, there's like different elements at different times of year, but the elements also sort of exist in the body systems, right? And the chi moves around the body at different times of day. So the chi will be in that element or that body system at different times of day. And so these are the times of day that are associated with each of these elements. And so kind of this could be one framework for thinking about creating kind of a rhythm for your day that's supportive of your health. And again, I would really encourage you to take a little time to get in touch with yourself if that's not already clear to you, what your own circadian rhythms are. I mean, one of my best friends is one of those people who like sleeps till noon and goes to sleep at 4 a.m. And he's like almost 40, you know what I mean? It's not like he's 18. That's just his natural rhythm, and that's where he feels the best. And so it's like, this might be a little bit less true for him. Skipping breakfast goes back to that basic self-care thing. Don't skip breakfast. When you eat breakfast, it gives you energy for the whole rest of the day. On a personal note, I will tell a story that I really like to work out. I'm a very physical person, and I didn't used to eat before my morning workouts because I felt like it made me a little bit more sluggish. And then I was like experiencing like all this adrenal fatigue and this burnout. I was working with Patricia, my herbal teacher, and she was like, wow, I noticed that you work out 2 hours a day, but you don't eat breakfast beforehand. Like, tell me about that. And I was like, I don't know, it just makes me feel sluggish, I don't know. And she's like, well, maybe try eating just a little bit of something, a little fat, a little protein, first thing in the morning. As soon as I started doing that, my energy crashed. Because what was happening is that I was using my adrenals to get me through those workouts. I was just using my willpower, and the euphoria from all the endorphins was kind of carrying me through the day, but I wasn't actually restoring this really important part of my health. And so it was like as soon as I started eating breakfast, I got a sense of my real energy levels, and it was like a lot less than I thought it was. And so that was a really helpful insight for me. Okay, so then the middle of the day, the most yang time of the day, the fire time of the day, that's like a great time of day for getting lots of stuff done, thinking about, your life purpose, getting inspiration, making plans, getting things done. The most important part of this probably is this one. Again, the water element. This is where a lot of us are really, really lacking. And we've got this strong wood element, this entrepreneurship, this overwork, this excitement about our projects that's just like sucking the water out of the ground of our lives and our bodies. So I put this part in bold because I think that honestly, if there's one change that you can make in your life, it would be to rest a little bit in the afternoon, to support building your water element, building your adrenal glands back up. And it can be for 20 minutes. If you have an hour, that's awesome, but if you don't, that's okay. It can also be a time of day when you start to when you do the work that you love the most, or do work that's a little bit requires less exertion than other types of your work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be sleeping per se, but just doing something where you can kind of get into that yin energy a little bit more. All right. And then this is like where the wood element is. And I think, you guys ever like notice that feeling where like you get really tired like earlier in the evening, and then like if you keep staying up, you like get a second wind. And you're like, oh my God, I'm like not even tired anymore. Like now I feel like working again, and I'm so excited. Part of that is because around 11 p.m. the chi moves into the liver, which is associated with wood. So again, it's this like excited about life, like gonna make stuff happen kind of energy, right? And but it also means that your liver won't be able to function as well. It's not really like doing what it's supposed to be doing at that time, which can also be associated with like wood XX symptoms, which are like stress stuff. It's also like PMS symptoms are associated with wood imbalance, which is something that Western medicine doesn't really have an explanation for. So if you have seasonal allergies, skin problems like acne and eczema, all of these things come from the wood element and the liver. And a lot of times, just going to bed before 11 can help that problem a lot. And especially if you have the type of insomnia where you have a hard time falling asleep, if you try to go to bed before 11, that can be like really helpful. That's a little bit of a side note, but
Okay. All right, so now I want to talk about some more sort of like practical ways to add more yin to your yang. So we need parasympathetic time every single day, right? We live a life, we've been talking about this the whole time, that where we are pretty much in like sympathetic mode all the time. We are in action mode most of the time in our lives. But it's not sustainable for the human body. We were not actually made to do that. And so we need some parasympathetic time every single day. But it's important, I think, to recognize that there is a difference between parasympathetic time, which is also highly restorative to your body. Did I spell that correctly? Yes. I thought I had a typo. And just vegging out or sleeping. Sleeping, obviously, is vital, right? Again, goes back to the basic self-care questions, which we're not necessarily talking about in this class. But if you never sleep, I might start there in terms of work-life balance. But like coming home and just like binging on Netflix for a while, or like having a bunch of drinks or something is not going to be restorative to your body in the same way as things like my nice little list here of things that actually do take your body into like that different state. I know there's like a term for it in terms of like the brain waves, like alpha waves and beta waves, and I just can never remember which one is which. But these are all things that like actively stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. And so, yes, we're having a conversation right now where you guys are all saying like, I don't really know how to build this into my life. And I would say like, if you can take 15 minutes in the afternoon, if you can take a half an hour before or after dinner to do something like this, it will add a lot to your life. And it doesn't have to be like making massive life changes, although we will talk about making massive life changes. Okay, so here are some ways that I really like to bring more yin into my yang, which is that like I think a lot of us who are kind of interested in like food and connecting to the earth and stuff are like that we don't have jobs where we have to be in our computers all the time. But there are also a lot of ways where in the modern world technology can support us in this journey. And so one of the things that I think is like the coolest thing to do is on YouTube, there are videos of like Tibetan singing bowls. And some of them are like hours long. You can just like put that on with your headphones and listen and have a sound bath of Tibetan singing bowls. It's just on YouTube. And another one of my personal favorite things to do is, you guys know about ASMR, right? This is phenomenon where when you hear certain types of sounds, like whispering and stuff, it makes your head feel tingly. So not everyone has it. There was like a This American Life or a Radiolab or something about this phenomenon. And yeah, so not everyone has it, but if you do, there is so much on YouTube. There are so many ASMR videos. It stands for like autonomic something something response. I can't remember what it stands for, but obviously you can look that up. There's a lot of like role playing where it's like this, like someone giving you a facial. And it's just on YouTube, or just like playing really pleasant sounds, or just like talking to you in a gentle way. A lot of them are specifically oriented towards helping you relax so you can sleep. And that's like just an amazing tool that's out there. Spotify has like nature sounds that you can listen to, and like that kind of music that they play in like spas is like meditation music that's just like sort of like chanting with like a creek in the background and that kind of thing. You can listen to it on Spotify. You don't have to buy anything, you know? And one of the reasons I really like those two options is that if you're anything like me, when I go to rest, when I go to turn off, I have a really hard time turning off. So when I go to take a nap in the afternoon, I'm still thinking about work. I'm still thinking about this project that I'm preparing for. I'm still planning dinner. I'm thinking about that really irritating conversation I had with my mom yesterday, and like, why did she say it like that? Da, 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 da. You know? And it's like really hard to just like turn off my brain. So replacing those sounds in my monkey brain with relaxing sounds is really, really helpful. And then, of course, there are like a million meditation apps. You know, if you don't already have a robust meditation practice, there are a lot of tools out there to kind of help you like get into that stuff. Okay, so we're going to keep going with some more practical strategies. Okay, establish loving boundaries around your own needs and cycles. I've heard multiple people this evening talk about having a hard time saying no. And I think that this kind of gets at that issue, which is like, once you're in touch with your own cycles, once you're in touch with what time of day you need to do the things to engage in your basic self-care, when you need to eat, when you need to exercise, when you need to sleep, when you need to rest. And when you are aware of those same types of cycles within your work life, what times of day, times of the month, or times of the year do I like to do certain types of work, or am I required to do certain types of work, right? So here's the boundaries question too, like, you might have your busiest time of year in the middle of the summer or in the middle of the winter, but if you can plan for that, then you can plan to have some parasympathetic time, some yin time, some rest time afterwards. And you can build boundaries, again, loving boundaries around those needs. And so it's really important to think about like how many projects you take on at once. How many clients do you need to work with in a day? How many, are you one of those people that like answers email constantly? Do you have like your notifications on so you get a notification every single time you get an email? My advice is to turn those notifications off and to set up a time of day when you do your emails. Meeting times. Right? I mean, if someone wants to meet you at 8 a.m. and that you are just like, that does not work for you, try to find a different time. I really need time in the evening to like wind down because I am a super energetic person who has a hard time turning off. And so if someone wants to meet me at 8 o'clock in the evening, I try to find a different time, right? Same like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I always get that afternoon sleepiness dip. So I try not to have a meeting right then because I'm not going to be at my best at that moment. Thinking about deadlines, like I think it's really important to get like very realistic about deadlines. So there are deadlines like in a grant cycle or something that you can't control. And those are situations in which it's important to just like try to build a little bit of a rest time afterwards because to balance out this intense time of lots and lots of work. If it's a day off, if it's a couple days off, even if it's taking the afternoon off, just something where you can like build a little bit of that yin time into the cycle of action and rest. But I think a lot of times when you're an entrepreneur, you're working with clients on a deadline or something like that, and so you have a little bit more control over what the deadlines are, and I think it's important to be realistic and not to create a deadline where you're like, oh, I want to prove to this person that I can do all these things and I can work 24 hours a day, and therefore I should be the one that you choose. But instead to think like, in what period of time am I really going to be able to get this done if I'm also taking care of myself? And then thinking about, the length of your workday and the days of the week that you want to work. I know, the Grant Park Farmers Market is my farmers market. It's on Sundays. I know a couple of you guys from there. And so it's like, I don't know exactly your particular case, but it's like, if you have a lot of markets sort of like you have like Thursday and then Saturday and then Sunday, can you take Mondays off or have a slower day on Mondays or have Mondays be a day when you don't have to be somewhere at 8 in the morning to set up or something? Just how can you, see this, again, getting back to these cycles where when there's a lot of action, how can you build some slowness afterwards? Okay, so I think it's just really important to like set clear expectations with people you work with. And that, again, that's about loving boundaries. I think creating loving boundaries is all about clear and open communication in our relationships and in our work life. So, yeah, just, making sure that you're not asking people to, allowing people to ask unreasonable things of you. Okay, so this is a really important one. Do what you love, delegate the rest. I'm just going to read these. So what in your work do you love the most? What energizes you and what drains you? If you're not already crystal clear on that, I would take some time, I would get out a piece of paper and literally write 2 lists. What are the things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever, in your work life? What energizes you? What drains you? And then figure out where you can hire, delegate, barter, or partner in order to spend 75 to 80% of your time on what energizes you most weeks of the year. That will not be possible every week of the year, obviously. This is a concept that I got from working with a coach named Jeff Berkovitz, who goes by the name Sparks, if you guys want to Google him. And he talks a lot about like living energized. That's like kind of his MO in a lot of ways. And so he experimented one year with only doing things that made him feel energized. And then he had a really funny story about the conversation he had to have with the IRS. Because, right, like in our lives, like you cannot only do the things you love. Like sometimes in life there's other stuff that gets in. But as much as you possibly can, figure out how to get the stuff that drains you off your plate. This list, what energizes you, what drains you, figuring out then how to hire, delegate, barter, partner, whatever, to get that stuff off your plate, that then becomes your priority to-do list for the next week, for the next month, the next 6 months, the next year, whatever, because obviously making changes takes time. But this should be a major priority unless you want to spend the rest of your life burning the candle at both ends and doing things that you don't really enjoy doing or never having time to clean your house or cook, right? So, of course, if you do that exercise and you're like, I just really can't figure out like how to do this, it might be an opportunity to talk to a life or a business coach to figure out a personalized strategy for you, or maybe just a friend who's like good at thinking like that and like gives good advice, someone who's been in a similar situation, talking to other people in the industry about things that work for them, that could be really helpful too. But it also might be time to really ask some hard questions. So if you really feel like you can't make any changes in your work life, maybe something else needs to change. And I think that it's really important to remember that quitting a job or selling your business or scaling down and deciding to work less are all perfectly acceptable options. And they may not feel acceptable to you, or they may be embarrassing, or they may be scary. And it's like we define those kinds of activities as failure a lot of times in our culture. But I think we also know as entrepreneurs that you learn from failures. So failure is not necessarily a bad thing. But it's also really important to not feel like just because you built something and just because it's sort of your baby in a certain sense that you can never abandon it and you can never let it go. Because it's not actually a baby. And it's really important to remember that distinction. A business is not a human being. It may involve human beings, but it's not the same as having an actual baby, even though it feels that way. And just like sometimes, people I just use this as another example of like a possibly difficult conversation to have if you feel, like you really can't make time to build any time in your life. You can't make time to do the things that you love. You can't make time to do sort of basic practical self-care things. Maybe it's not a life partner, maybe it's a business partner, maybe it's friends, maybe it's family, but there might be other ways you can get a little bit of support, and those can sometimes be some hard conversations to have. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about this question of making positive change. So if you are in a position where you're like, okay, something really needs to change. Like I really need to make some changes in my work life because at the rate I'm going, this is not sustainable. We're going to go through a few of these exercises, but I encourage you to take some time to think about what your ideal life actually looks like. So we'll hopefully have a little time to actually do that. And I'm also going to send you guys some stuff afterwards in a handout that I didn't have time to put together before the actual presentation. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the basic concept is, what does your ideal life look like? What needs to happen in order to make that life a reality? And then put together a plan or a strategy to make those things happen. And it can be, something that takes a really, really long time. But it's important to think about living your life on purpose and not getting stuck on the treadmill or, like you said, the carousel of just like working, and I can't ever figure out how to make any changes. The first step is visualizing what it is that you do want. Okay, so now we're going to do some exercise stuff. Oh, I asked you about the time before. There's a giant clock on the wall. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of an overview of this stuff, and then hopefully we will have a little bit of time for questions and maybe for like doing some of these exercises. So these are all, sorry, my throat gets dry from talking. I have marshmallow root in this, so it's soothing to your mucosal tissues, like your throat. Okay, so these are tools that I got from working with Jeff Berkowitz, Sparks. These are all tools that he uses in his coaching practice. Okay, so I'm first talking about this notion of forking, which I told him, I was like, Jeff, that sounds like some really gross euphemism for something. I don't know what, but it sounds really weird. But it's a term he uses, so I adopted it, whatever. So it's basically this, is that a lot of times in life, when we're asking a hard question or trying to make a big change, we feel like we're choosing between 2 things, 3 things, 4 things, whatever. And you're like, well, I just can't, I don't know if this is the best thing to do or this is the best thing to do. But a lot of times we think that we're like right here choosing between these 2 things. Can you guys see my hand okay? But actually we're like a little bit down here. It's not totally time yet to make that decision. And so what this looks like is if you're trying to make a really big decision, you say, okay, so I have this one option. I could go for option 1, or I could go for option 2. And what you do is you write down all of the action steps that you would take if you were to do option 1. And then you write down all of the action steps that you would take if you were to do option 2. And there could be 5, 10 options here. I mean, I don't know, this is applicable to like making any kind of gigantic decision. So there can be a lot of choices. It doesn't have to be 2. But you look at those 2 lists, and then you see what those lists have in common. And that's where you start. Then that becomes your priority to-do list, on top of getting the things off your plate that you hate doing. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay, so then your ideal life vision, somewhat self-explanatory, but as an exercise, so it's an exercise in envisioning your ideal life, right? But the way you want to do this is you want to envision the day-to-day life of your ideal life. So you want to start with, where do you wake up? Next to whom? What's the first thing you do when you get out of bed? And then what's the next thing you do? And then what's the next thing you do? And literally like write out the whole day. So for me, for example, it'd be like, okay, I'm waking up in Atlanta or in the mountains of North Georgia, North Carolina, or Tennessee, next to my partner, who is my current partner, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case for you. In this vision, we have a baby, which we don't have yet. And then I get out of bed and I go, I have a small breakfast for my energy retention. And then I go for a run in the park or for a run in the woods. And I come home and I do some yoga for maybe half an hour. And then I have probably a little bit more food, shower, and then I meet with a client. Maybe it's a coaching client or a client who wants an herbal consultation, or who's doing some other kind of energy work or styling work with me. And then after that, I break for lunch, and the lunch is food that we've grown in our own garden. And then after lunch, I rest for about a half an hour, and then I have a meeting with a team that I'm working with. And I'm not currently working with any teams, but I like working with teams. So I'm like, okay, I would love to like have a nice afternoon meeting working with a team of people who I love. You guys kind of see where this is going? It's totally fine, first of all, to have multiple versions of this also, to have like several different ideal days. And it's also really important to try as much as possible to make this tactile and visceral. So this is actually something that I got from my sister, who's a health coach, who also does like manifestation coaching with people, and she's very talented. She has people, when they're kind of working on a goal, anchor the feeling of that goal with your 5 senses. So what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it look like? What does it feel like on your skin? As well as like what it feels like in your heart or in your gut. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, so then the Good Life Index is a list of 5 to 10 things, no more than 10, that are the experiences that make you feel most alive. Jeff talks about making you feel most energized, but I think a lot in terms of making you feel like your most authentic self. What are the experiences that you have in your life that make you feel like your life is going really well? So these are not activities, these are categories of experience. So things that would not go on this list are like running. But things that would go on this list are like times when I feel like I can feel the power of my physical body. So you kind of pick out maybe 5 or 10 things, and then you give them like cute names that help you remember them. So to give you a few examples from my own life. The first one on my list I call CNC Music Factory. Do you guys remember CNC Music Factory? They're like a pop dance group from the early 90s. I think they might have done Pump Up the Jam, or anyway, you can Google them. They've done some songs you've heard of, and they're awesome. My name starts with a C. My partner's name also starts with a C. And so forever ago, that's just like a silly nickname that I came up with for us as a couple. And so CNC Music Factory to me means times when we are having quality time together, times when we are having intimate heart connection, right? So that can be having dinner together, that can be watching TV together, that can be physical intimacy, that can be all kinds of things, right? But they all come together for this experience that I know viscerally in my body what CNC Music Factory means to me. I also have another one called nesting, which is those times when I'm like, it's like going to the farmer's market and going to the grocery store and cleaning the house and decluttering the house and decorating the house and just doing things for like the household and the family unit that are like about, providing food and providing like a loving, warm home for our family. I have another one called Amazon, which are the times when that was my example, when I feel the physical power of my physical body. So I get that feeling from dancing, from running, from lifting weights, from doing yoga, from hiking, from all kinds of things, right? But I know that if I'm going to work out, I hope that experience becomes an Amazon experience. It's not always. Sometimes I'm really tired, and sometimes I feel awkward, and sometimes you break your ankle or your whatever, but so you're not feeling very powerful. But I know that those are things that I want to have in my life. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But so then the ings are the activities that make you feel that stuff. So they're the activities in your life, the gerunds, right? The running, reading, hiking, sleeping, napping, that make you feel most energized, most alive, like your most authentic self. And so your good life index is like 5 to 10 things, but your ings is as long as you want it to be, right? I mean, it can be pages and pages and pages of activities that you like doing. And a lot of times there are many ings that feed one item in your good life index. So where these become helpful as a tool is your good life index becomes a sort of, so there's multiple ways you can use it. It's helpful, sometimes you can like journal at night and just sort of like keep track of like how many of those experiences you've had in that day, and then you can sort of at the end of the month, like, how many good life index experience did I have this month? Jeff Berkovitz emphasizes sort of the month as a unit of measurement for experiencing these things, because in the course of a day or a week, things happen, stuff comes up, so you can't always have like a week where you're experiencing all the things that make you feel the best in your life. But in a month, probably you can experience a lot of those. It's a more manageable amount of time in terms of like living your life on purpose, making it what you want it to be. So I know people who have worked with Jeff who have a spreadsheet with their good life index like list on the top, and they literally like tick boxes, and then at the end of the week they see what they experienced. That's not really how I do things, just because it's like I just hate spreadsheets, so it's just like not really my vibe. The way that I use this is like I just sort of have this list around. I'll have it on my desk, I'll have it in my journal, I'll have like just like sort of around in my life. You can even keep it in the back of your head if that's easier for you. But when things start to feel a little weird, like I just feel a little out of balance in my life or whatever, I look and I say, okay, how many of these items have I experienced in the past week or in the past month? And you start to see a pattern. You start to see like, wow, I've really been doing a lot of nesting, but I have really not been spending time with my nephews, which is another thing that's on my list. Or another one on my list I call Nova, which is experiencing things I've never experienced before, which I really love. It can be anything. It can be relatively mundane things, just like driving through a neighborhood in Atlanta I've never driven through before, or tasting a food I've never eaten before, or something like that. But, you know, there's times I'm like, wow, I've experienced like a lot of Nova in my life, but very little CNC Music Factory. And so then I start to see like, okay, I need to make some time for these things. And then the ings as a tool become this really helpful way when you are feeling tired, when you're feeling funky, when you're feeling out of balance, when you've just had a crappy day for some reason, or you're feeling really stressed out. Just like literally grab the list and do something on that list. You know, just start dancing, read a book, call your best friend on the phone, like those things that you know you like to do, but for some reason when you're on the treadmill of daily life, it gets really hard to do. You can have this list like at the ready. You can keep it on your phone, you know? Okay, great. Wow, that is excellent. All right, so then just last little bit, I decided when I was asked to do this that I wanted to give a discount for CFM vendors. So I'm giving a 50% discount for CFM vendors for any of my packages or individual sessions. I do coaching packages of 3 and 5. And I find that a lot easier to work with people so I can sort of help them over a length of time. But, you know, if you only have time for one or you can only afford one or whatever, that's fine. Although 50% is a pretty hefty discount. And I'm not taking any new clients until after the new year. Again, I am practicing what I'm preaching here, and I'm doing a lot of resting this winter because my body really, really needs it. But after the new year, I'm going to probably start getting back more into it. So I was originally thinking that I would do it just for the people who are here, but I think I'm actually going to do it for all the CFM vendors, because why not? Because you guys are great, and I want to support a good cause, and I really believe in, I think you guys are adding a lot to our city, and it matters a lot to me. So you in the recordings, I'm giving a 50% discount to those people too. Yeah. Yes, so that's my email. I actually don't have a website yet because I mentioned I was kind of getting into all these projects and started getting back into old really bad habits of work life and decided to like chill out. So I was kind of just working through like word of mouth for a while. And so I'm still using a Gmail address. But that's my contact information if anyone wants to contact me, and they can just say that they're a CFM vendor, and I may verify that in some way. But I just wanted to offer that to you guys. I do other work as well, so if you're curious about my other work, then I can send you information about that. Obviously, we've been talking mostly about coaching stuff today, so I was like making this available for my coaching packages, but I would do it for my other work as well. So if you're curious about that, please shoot me an email, and I'll send you like whole descriptions of the stuff.